There are moments in the universe where a single transaction changes everything, not because of what was bought, but because of what was paid. This is the story of a man who spent his last 10 credits on a stranger in chains and discovered that some debts cannot be measured in currency. The holding pens on Drift Station 7 smelled like rust and desperation. Cade Chen had been coming to these auctions for 6 years, ever since the fuel hauler contract dried up and left him with nothing but a ship that barely flew and skills nobody needed anymore. He bought scrap, he bought surplus. Sometimes he bought labor contracts from people who'd run out of options in the outer colonies. He had never seen a Kelethan before, not like this. Not in chains. They were architects of worlds, or had been, back when the galaxy still remembered what civilization meant. Their empire had spanned 40 systems once. Cade had seen their ruins on terraformed moons, spires that bent light, cities that sang when the wind moved through them. The woman they dragged onto the platform didn't look like an architect of anything. She was tall, nearly 7 feet, her skin like midnight cut with veins of phosphorescence that pulsed faintly even under the suppressors clamped to her wrists. Her eyes were black from edge to edge, no white, no iris, just depth. They reflected nothing as she stared past the crowd, past the station walls, past everything. Lot 63, the broker called out, sounding bored. Kelethan female, origin unclear, no registry, no sponsorship, sold as is, opening at 8 credits. 8 credits, for a species that had built quantum gates before humanity learned to write. A Vex trader on Cade's left made a clicking sound. Amusement, probably. Broken goods, it translated through its vocalizer. Imperial refugee, likely disgraced, no value. 8, someone called from the back. Cade didn't plan to speak. The word came out on its own. 10. The Vex turned all 3, eye stalks toward him. The crowd murmured. The broker waited. No one else bid. Sold to the human. 10 credits. Cade walked to the platform. His account balance dropped to almost nothing. A data key materialized in his palm. Temporary custody, the kind that meant you owned someone until they ran or you released them or the law caught up. They shoved her forward. She moved without stumbling, without resistance, like she'd stopped caring about balance or dignity or survival. Up close, he could see the scars beneath the phosphorescence. Geometric patterns, deliberate, covering her arms and neck. Not decorative. Punishment. Why? She asked. Her voice resonated in his chest, deeper than sound should go. Cade deactivated the suppressors. His hands didn't shake, but his heart did. Because 8 credits is an insult, he said. I gave you 10. That's 2 more than they thought you were worth. She looked at him, really looked, for the first time. You are either naive, she said slowly, or you are playing a game I do not yet understand. Mostly I'm just tired, Cade said. I've got a ship. It's not impressive, but it's got heat and nobody's going to put those things back on you. That work for you? She didn't answer. Cade turned and started walking. After 5 seconds, he heard her footsteps behind him. The ship was called Mira's Echo, named after his wife. She'd died in the Centauri outbreak 7 years ago, along with 40,000 others. The ship had been their dream once, their way out of the corporate stations, their future. Now it was just a cargo hauler with failing seals and an engine that sounded like it was coughing up bolts. The Kelethan stood in the cargo bay, taking it in without expression. Cade had cleared out a corner, made space that could pass for quarters if you were generous. That's yours, he said. Privacy screens functional. Hygiene stations through there. Water rations are tight, so don't go long. You give me territory, she said. On your vessel. where you are vulnerable. Yeah? You do not fear retaliation? Cade shrugged. Should I? She studied him. I have not decided. Fair, let me know. He moved toward the galley, started pulling out ration packs. Standard protein, rehydrated vegetables, nothing special. He heated 2 and set one on the small table bolted to the deck. Sit, he said. Eat. You look half-starved. Calithan do not require, everyone requires food. Sit. She sat. They ate in silence. Cade didn't push. Silence was fine. Silence was easier than the wrong words. When she finished, she set the utensil down with careful precision. Sarian, she said. Cade looked up. My name, it is Sarian. Cade Chen. He didn't offer his hand. Different species, different customs. Good to meet you. She watched him for a long moment. You are strange, Cade Chen. Yeah, he said. I get that a lot. 4 days into the voyage, heading nowhere in particular, just away from Drift 7 and the debts. Piling up behind him, Sarian finally spoke more than necessity required. Cade was in the engine bay, rerouting power conduits that had no business failing this often when she appeared. Silent. He still wasn't used to that. You were military, she said, not a question. Cade kept working. Colonial defense, 12 years. Got out after the outbreak. After your wife, his hands stilled. You went through my files. Your ship speaks her name at startup. The photograph in the cockpit. The way you navigate, always choosing the longer route, as if you are avoiding arrival. She moved closer. I did not need files. Cade pulled himself out from under the conduit panel. She was a medic, got assigned to Centauri Station when the virus hit. I was halfway across the sector. By the time I got clearance to go back, the whole station was under quarantine. He wiped his hands on his pants. Never saw her again. And so you save others instead. I fix engines, Cade said. That's all. You fix broken things. Sarian's voice had shifted, softer. Broken ships, broken systems, broken women in auction houses. You're not broken. You do not know what I am. Cade looked at her, really looked, the way he'd been avoiding since the station. In the harsh utility lighting of the engine bay, he could see what he'd missed before. The phosphorescent lines in her skin weren't natural, they were scars. Burn scars following the pattern of her nervous system. Someone had mapped her biology and then set it on fire from the inside. They did that to you, he said quietly. Your own people. I was second architect of the Calithan Enclave, she said. Daughter of the High Shaper. When my mother died, my brother assumed the position. I questioned his methods publicly, repeatedly. She touched the scars on her neck. Dissent is treated as structural failure. He attempted to erase me. 4 years of reconditioning. 4 years of refusing to collapse. So he sold you. An unregistered. Calithan is nothing. No lineage, no claim. Worthless. Her black eyes met his. Or worth 10 credits, apparently. Cade felt something tighten in his chest. Not pity, she'd hate that. Something else. Recognition. Your brother sounds like he needs a visit from someone with a fusion torch. And poor impulse control. For the first time, Sarian's expression shifted. Not quite a smile. Close. My brother commands 6,000 warships, she said. So that's a no then. You just about confronting an empire. I just about a lot of things, Cade said. Keeps me from thinking too hard about the rest. She was quiet. Then, why do you help me, Cade Chen? What do you want in return? I want the water recycler to stop leaking. I want the hyperdrive to not sound like it's grinding rocks. He glanced at her. And I want to not eat alone every night. That's about it. You are lying. Maybe, but it's a comfortable lie. He turned back to the conduit. You want to help? Hand me the plasma. Coupler, the one with the red grip. She stared at him, then slowly reached for the tool and placed it in his hand. Their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away immediately. You treat me as an equal, she said. Not as Calithan, not as second architect, as if titles mean nothing. Right now, you're crew, Cade said. Crew helps with repairs. Crew eats together. Crew doesn't have to explain anything unless they want to. And when crew cannot sleep, when the memories return? The question came out quieter than anything she'd said before. Cade paused. Crew sits in the cockpit and watches the stars. Sometimes crew talks, sometimes crew just sits. That sounds acceptable. Tonight then, after dinner, I'll show you the observation window. It's the one thing on this ship that actually works right. She nodded once and left as silently as she'd come. That night they sat together in the darkness of the cockpit, watching distant stars burn against the void. Neither of them spoke, but at some point, without thinking, Cade's hand moved to rest on the console between them. Sarian's hand came to rest beside it. Their fingers didn't touch, but they were close enough to feel warmth. It was enough. The attack came on a supply run to Halos Junction. Cade had just finished haggling for fuel cells, overpriced, but Mira's echo was running on fumes when Sarian's voice crackled through his comm. Cade, ships incoming, 4 vessels, Calithan configuration. His blood went cold. By the time he reached the ship, Sarian had the engines warming. Through the viewport, he could see them. 4 sleek cruisers, their hulls marked with the silver fractal of the Calithan enclave. They found me, Sarian said, calm voice, shaking hands. Can we outrun them? No. Calithan vessels are faster, more precise. They will intercept within the hour. Cade dropped into the pilot's seat, pulling up tactical displays. She was right. The math was brutal. 4 military cruisers against 1. Cargo hauler held together by spite and prayer. Then we don't run. He started plotting. The Ashvale Nebula is 3 jumps from here. Radiation storms, censored dead zones. If we can reach it, they'll have to follow blind. And you know this nebula? Spent 4 months hiding there after Mira died. Didn't want to be found. He engaged the jump drive. I know it. They don't. Sarian studied his face. You would risk your life. For me. Crew doesn't leave crew behind. The first jump was rough. The second rattled the ship so hard Cade thought the hull might split. By the third, the Calithan ships were close enough that Cade could see their weapons charging. He dove into the nebula's chaos, navigating by memory through corridors of ionized gas and electrical storms. Mira's echo screamed warnings from every system, but she held. She always held. Still following, Sarian reported. 3 ships, 1 holding position at the perimeter. They're herding us, Cade muttered, pushing us toward the core where the radiation's worst. There is no escape. There's the hollow. Sarian turned. What hollow? Asteroid cluster. Runs through the nebula's heart. I used to hide there when I didn't want to exist. He adjusted course. There's a gap in the largest rock, big enough for us, shielded enough to hide our signature. The asteroids materialized from the radiation fog like ancient gravestones. Cade wove between them, closing in on the massive iron core asteroid he remembered. The gap was still there, barely wide enough. He killed the engines, let momentum carry them into darkness, and waited. Minutes passed. The Calithan ships swept by, once, twice, then silence. Cade exhaled. His hands were shaking. We are trapped, Sarian said. They will wait. Then we wait too. He unstrapped, moved toward supplies. We've got air for 3 weeks. Food's tight, but we'll manage. 3 weeks, and then we figure it out. Cade. Her hand caught his arm. Her grip was strong, her skin warm where it had been cold before. Why are you doing this? You could surrender me. They would let you go. No, you do not even hesitate, because there's nothing to hesitate about. He turned to face her. 7 years ago, I lost everything. I've been drifting ever since, just moving, fixing things, never stopping long enough to care. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His fingers brushed the scars on her neck. Your crew, you matter, not because of what you were, because of who you are now. Her black eyes glistened. I do not know how to process this. My people do not form bonds this way. We calculate advantage, we assess structure, we build alliances through function. Then don't be your people, be you. What if I do not remember who that is? Then we figure it out together. She kissed him. It wasn't passion. It was a question. Cade answered gently, his hands cradling her face, feeling the dampness on her cheeks. When they broke apart, she pressed her forehead to his. I am afraid, she whispered. For the first time in years, I have something to lose. Me too, he said, but that's what makes it real. On the 19th day, Sarian made her decision. Cade woke to find her at the communications array, fingers hovering over the controls. What are you doing? What I should have done years ago. She turned. I am going to invoke Kaleth Sareth, the right of challenge. Sarian. In Kalithan law, a bloodline member cannot be erased without formal censure before the Enclave Council. My brother imprisoned me, tortured me, sold me, but he never completed the ritual. She crossed to him, took his hands. He was afraid. Afraid of what I would say, afraid of the truth. What truth? That he killed our mother, that he seized power through murder. Her grip tightened. I have no proof, but I have my voice, and I have my blood. They'll kill you. Perhaps. But if I invoke the challenge, the hunters outside cannot touch me. Law binds them. They must escort me home for judgment. A judgment controlled by your brother. Yes, but not everything. She smiled, the first real smile he'd ever seen. He does not control the people, the lower castes, the ones who remember what the Enclave was before his cruelty twisted it. If I can reach them, speak to them. You could start a revolution. Or die trying. Cade was quiet. What happens to us? He finally asked. You would not be harmed. I would ensure it. You would be free to go. That's not what I meant. She touched his face. I know. Then don't go. We can leave Kalithan space. Find some colony on the edge of nowhere. Disappear. And spend my life hiding, running? She shook her head. That is not who I am. That is not who you helped me remember I could be. She kissed him softly. You taught me that broken does not mean finished, that there is strength in choosing to care when apathy is easier. I want to bring that to my people. Even if it kills you? Especially then. Some things matter more than survival. She pulled back, met his eyes. You taught me that too. Cade held her, made a decision of his own. Then I'm coming with you. Cade. Crew doesn't leave crew behind. He pulled back. Besides, someone has to keep your systems running. Kalithan probably don't know the first thing about maintenance. You would enter an empire that despises your species. You would stand before a tyrant who commands armies. For me, I paid 10 credits for you, Cade said. I'm not wasting that investment. She laughed. Actually, laughed. You are impossible. So I've been told. The broadcast went out an hour later, Sarian's voice speaking ancient words that hadn't been uttered in 2 centuries. The hunter ships responded immediately. Not with weapons, with acknowledgement. The right had been invoked. They were bound. The journey to the Kelethan homeworld took 8 days. 8 days in which Cade learned everything. Sarian could teach him about her people, their customs, their weaknesses, their fears. 8 days in which they planned, and occasionally just held each other in the darkness. The homeworld, it was beautiful. A planet of prismatic architecture and oceans that reflected light in impossible ways, ruled by a man who had murdered his own mother for power. Cade stood beside Sarian as she descended from Mira's echo, his hand in hers, facing a crowd of thousands. The trial lasted 5 days. Sarian spoke of truth, her brother spoke of order. The council deliberated, but in the end, it wasn't the council that decided. It was the people, the lower castes who filled the streets, who chanted Sarian's name, who remembered what the enclave had been. When her brother ordered her silence, they rose. When he called for enforcers, the enforcers refused. By the 5th dawn, it was over. The tyrant was in restraints, and Sarian stood before the High Assembly. She could have claimed power. The position was hers by blood and revolution. Instead, she turned to the council. "I do not want your throne," she said. "I want your promise. Reform this enclave. End the practice of selling our own people. Open dialogue with the species we have dismissed as lesser. Build something worthy of what we were." "And if we refuse?" the eldest counselor asked. "Then I will return with my human," Sarian said, "and we will be considerably less patient." The council agreed. Later, in the gardens where she had once been imprisoned, Sarian found Cade watching the twin suns set over the prismatic spires. "You could have ruled," he said. "I could have." She took his hand. "But that was never what I wanted. I wanted to matter, to repair something, to find someone who saw me as more than my lineage or my position." She looked at him. "I found that in a cargo bay, from a man who paid 10 credits for a woman worth an empire. 10 credits was all I had. It was everything." She turned to face him fully. "Stay with, me, Cade Chen. Not as a consort, not as a political tool, as my partner, as my equal, as the man who fixed something in me I thought was irreparable. I'm human. Your people will talk. Let them talk. Let the whole galaxy talk." She smiled. "I was worth an empire. You were worth more." Cade kissed her under alien suns, surrounded by the whispers of a revolution they had sparked together. Mira's echo stayed in orbit around the Kelethan homeworld for years afterward, a strange little cargo hauler among the prismatic warships. Cade never stopped fixing things. There was always something broken that could be made whole. But the most important thing he ever fixed wasn't a ship. It was a woman who had forgotten she was worth more than 10 credits, and she had fixed him right back. The end.